Okay. Yesterday, that is 26th of November, was Constitution Day. Samvidhan Divas, as we call it. That was the day in 1949 when the Constituent Assembly framed the Constitution of India. It was accepted by everybody in the Constituent Assembly, and it was decided that the Constitution of India would come into force after 90 days. That is on 26th of January 1950. So, in the context of the Constitution Day or Samvidhan Divas, I would just like to share a few thoughts about our Constitution, about democracy, and about governance. Yeah. About Constitution, governance, and democracy, something which has also been discussed in the report of Promises and Reality. The preamble to our Constitution talks about four very important things, that is, justice, liberty, equality, and fraternity. I think these four words are really the essence of the Constitution. They tell us what the Constitution is all about. And to achieve this preamble, to achieve justice, liberty, equality, and fraternity, the Constitution has recognized, it has not given us, but it has recognized our fundamental rights. We are born with fundamental rights, and the Constitution says in Part 3 that these are recognized. So we have the fundamental right of freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom of movement, freedom to protest peacefully, freedom to carry on any business or profession that we like as long as it is not something illegal. So all these fundamental rights have been given to us, the right to equality, the right to life and liberty. All these have been recognized by our Constitution in Part 3. Part 4 of the Constitution talks about the directive principles of state policy. What is it that the Constitution makers, the Constituent Assembly, what is it that they want India to be like? So they have put in directive principles of state policy, which is something that the state should try to achieve. It may take time. It could be, for example, education. It could be nutrition, improvement in nutrition. It could be education, whatever. So there are a large number of directive principles of state policy, which is what the Constitution makers, which is what they believed that India should try to achieve. So if we harmonize our fundamental rights, if we harmonize those with the directive principles of state policy, that is when we will get an ideal India. That is the idea, that is the aspiration of our Constitution makers. So with this sort of a background of trying to achieve the objectives in the preamble of justice, liberty, equality, fraternity, I think we need to step back a little bit and try to see what has been happening over the last so many years. The report does talk about many of these issues, and I would just like to break up some of them for your consideration. First is, we all know that the pillars of democracy, that is the legislature, the executive, the judiciary, and the press. I believe that civil society is also one of the pillars of democracy. I think it is one of the most important pillars of democracy. We all belong to civil society. So if we are not there, there can't be any democracy, there can't be any constitution. Now, the report tells us about the legislature. I do not want to make any comment, but I just want to point out that the report tells us that 40% of our members of parliament have criminal cases against them. Now, some of them may be, political vendetta, where you say that, all right, because you belong to a different political party, I will file a case against you. So let's discount those. But there are some members of parliament who have got very heinous cases pending against them. You have cases such as murder, You have cases such as attempt to murder. You have cases of kidnapping. Now, these are very, very serious cases, and they are pending against our members of parliament. So, the question that we have to ask ourselves is that should people like this represent us? What is it that we can do that we are being represented by people who have the values of the Constitution, who profess the morality of the Constitution rather than persons who have a criminal background? The Supreme Court had earlier passed an order saying that all these cases pertaining to elected representatives, not only Parliament but also in the Vidhan Sabha, all these cases should be expedited. The reality is that none of them, maybe very few, none of them, except perhaps a few, are progressing. So we still have all these people in the legislature representing us. We are also told that many of the bills are passed hurriedly, without any discussion, without any debate. Lawmaking is the primary function of the legislature. When we talk about the rule of law, that law is laid down by the legislature, and it has to be in accordance with the Constitution of India. But we are told that, well, the laws are passed in a very hurried manner. Sometime back, a former Chief Justice of India, at that time he was the Chief Justice, he said that laws are enacted without much discussion and they lead to a lot of confusion, or there is no clarity in those laws. Now, when you make laws, there are a lot of things that you have to discuss. What is the impact of the legislation? What is the financial impact? What is the judicial impact? Now, we've had laws, for example, changes in the Negotiable Instruments Act. The result of the change was that thousands and thousands of cases were filed with regard to check bouncing, and many of them are still pending. There was a time when in the courts in Delhi, 1,000 cases were being filed under the Negotiable Instruments Act. So these are things that, we have to discuss. Changes in legislation, whether it is pertaining to the Indian Penal Code or whether it is pertaining to the Criminal Procedure Code, all these have to be discussed with the people. But there is no time that is devoted to this discussion or to this debate. On the other hand, we've had situations where Parliament has been adjourned 5 days in advance or 6 days in advance. We've had situations where the Vidhan Sabha has been adjourned a couple of days in advance. In any case, most Vidhan Sabhas meet for less than 20 days in a year. And out of those 20 days also, in 4 or 5 days, there is some disruption or the Vidhan Sabha is adjourned 4 or 5 days in advance. So really about 15 days on an average, it is meeting. This is the contribution of our legislators to lawmaking. What about meeting our legislators? Now, we have a problem. Many of us do not have access to our members of parliament. Many of us do not even know who's our MP. Many of us perhaps do not know who is our MLA. We do not know who is our municipal councillor. Now, I'm not talking about Delhi, I'm talking about the entire country, where people do not know who is actually representing them. And if they do know who is representing them, the problem is of access. How do you contact them? If I want to contact my municipal councillor or if I want to contact my MP, it's not easy. I have to find out where that person is. I have to find out the phone number, talk to the private secretary. Private secretary will say, "Saab busy hain, saab bahar gaye hain, ye ho raha hai, wo ho raha hai." How will I know? I will tell you the importance of being able to contact our legislators. Sometime in June, May or June, there were 2 judges from India, from Delhi, who had paid for a course on judicial education in Canada. But their visa was not being processed in time. This is all before this problem with Canada started. This was, I'm talking about May and June. And it was brought to the notice of the organizer that, for some reason the Canadian High Commission is not processing the papers in time. The organizer rang up her member of parliament in Canada and said, this is what the problem is. These judges want to come. They've paid for the course. That member of parliament rang up the High Commissioner in Canada and said, can you please process their application for visa? And it was processed and they were allowed to go. That is where, your MP, your MLA, your municipal councillor becomes very important so that things can be done. You don't have to go to court for everything. If a road is not being built properly or if there are too many khaddas in that road, you don't have to go to the court and say that what is all this happening. You have to go to your municipal councillor, but then access to that municipal councillor is a problem. So we have this, problem, I may not be the correct word, but we have this issue with the legislature. Are they doing what we as the people expect them to do or what we aspire from them? Then you have the second pillar of democracy, that is the executive. Now, there is an issue about the implementation of laws. The Parliament makes laws, Vidhan Sabha makes laws. The issue is of implementation. I can tell you that when I was in the Supreme Court, in the social justice bench, we had a very large number of cases that dealt with non-implementation of laws. For example, the Building and Other Construction Workers Act not being implemented. It is a law of 1996, but it was not being implemented. Even today, there are problems about the implementation of the BOCW Act. Problems about Manrega not being implemented. People were working, but they were not getting their wages in time. The wages had to be paid within 15 days, not being paid. And what is the answer? The answer is that, we don't have money just now. We're trying to verify, we're trying to do this, we're trying to do that. Even today, there are problems in the implementation of Manrega. A good law made by Parliament, not being implemented in true letter and spirit. Food security. That's another law which has not been implemented faithfully. I can give you a whole host of laws. Laws pertaining to disabled persons, laws pertaining to children. Annie had mentioned about that, Juvenile Justice Act. Laws pertaining to senior citizens, old age homes. Do you know that every district in the country is supposed to have an old age home? We don't have it. Every district is supposed to have a home, shelter home for children, observation home. We don't have it. So you have laws which are good, but the executive is not implementing those laws. You have laws, like I said, for a variety of issues, tribals, Dalits, disabled persons, marginalized sections of society, not being implemented. Policies, that's another area which the executive is directly concerned with, framing of policies. We just heard Nandita speak about the education policy. Where is the discussion? Is it that some people sit in their office and say, all right, well, this is what the policy should be? What about the environment? We have problems about the policy of the environment impact assessment. Education policy. We have youth policy that has been again referred to in the report. Cyber security policy. Data protection policy. There are so many of these policies which are being framed by our executive, but which unfortunately are not being discussed, which are not being debated. People don't even know what those policies are. I had to deal with the wetlands. There are more than 1 lakh wetlands in the country. There's no cohesive wetland policy. So many of our wetlands have got destroyed. We are now constructing artificial lakes. Why? Because we're not able to protect our wetlands. So again, there is this problem that we are facing with the executive. Appointments, Lokpal, the Lokpal is lying vacant for I don't know how many months, right? We are having problems with the appointment of persons to the uh, this Information Commission. So these are roles of the executive which I'm afraid they're not able to fulfill. Then you have heavy-handed implementation of the laws. So on the one hand, there are laws which are not being implemented. On the other hand, you have laws which are being implemented with a very heavy hand. Bulldozer justice is something that people have been talking about. Homes are being demolished, right? It's not only one or two homes, but hundreds of homes are being demolished without any notice, without following any legal procedure. The courts have had to sometimes interfere in the demolition. Bulldozer justice has taken over from what we call natural justice. You have the sedition law under the IPC. It was being used against everybody. We heard that also a little earlier about sedition laws being used. Students were being punished. School children, schools, the teachers were being punished because children were doing something which the police thought was seditious. Persons who say something on Twitter, they were being charged with sedition. The Supreme Court said, please don't enforce the sedition law. All right. Sedition law was not enforced. What did the executive do? The executive started using UAPA, Unlawful Activities Prevention Act. And where they could somehow or the other bring in UAPA, they brought in UAPA and arrested people. Now the trend has been to bring in the National Security Act. So while we have the right to protest under the Constitution, a fundamental right to protest, if somebody protests, well, your protest is anti-national and you're a national security threat. So therefore, persons are put under National Security Act. And persons have been preventively detained without a trial under the National Security Act for months together, several months, in some cases for more than a year. So this is, where the executive, I think, needs to be actually accountable to the people of the country. So when we talk about the Constitution, when we talk about our rights, there are persons who have to answer to that. And the executive is the one which is implementing the laws, however good or however bad they may be, in a manner which is not constitutionally permissible. What about the judiciary? Now, every day in the newspapers, we are hearing something or the other about, a problem between the executive and the judiciary. Appointments are not being made. The Supreme Court recommends persons for appointment as judges. The executive says, sorry, we're not going to appoint that person. Yesterday or day before, yesterday, 2 days ago, 2 or 3 days ago, a person who was recommended for appointment as a judge of the Bombay High Court, his name was cleared by the government after 21 months. So, and there are so many others whose names are, by the way, pending. Some for as long as 2 years, some as long as 3 years. There are several of them whose names are pending for appointment as judges for several weeks, months, and years. Now, the result of this is that the independence of the judiciary, which is fundamental to the Constitution of India, that gets eroded. People don't know that, whether this person is going to be appointed or not going to be appointed. If that person is appointed, why is he being appointed? He's being appointed because he's going to decide in favor of the government. That person is not being appointed because the government believes that that person is going to decide cases against the government. So that faith that people have in the appointment process, in the judiciary, that gets somewhat eroded because of this problem that we are facing with regard to appointment of judges. What is the judiciary doing about it? There is very little that the judiciary can do. They can just pull up the government and say, why aren't you doing it? But ultimately, it is something which the government has to do. We recently had this issue about the governors not, giving assent to bills passed by the state legislature. The state of Tamil Nadu had gone to the Supreme Court. The state of Punjab had gone to the Supreme Court. State of Kerala has gone to the Supreme Court. In the case of the Punjab Assembly, the Supreme Court gave a judgment recently that the governor has to accept what the Vidhan Sabha says. Now, having passed that judgment, supposing the governor says, no, I will not do anything, what is the Supreme Court going to do? Ultimately, this is where, constitutional morality comes in, constitutional values come in. The Supreme Court cannot say that, you better sign. He will say, I will not sign. What will you do? In Manipur, the speaker had to be directed by the Supreme Court that you please decide the anti-defection petition that is pending before you. He said, all right, I will decide. The Maharashtra speaker was given time. He said, no, I will take my own time. Ultimately, the Supreme Court was forced to say that you please decide by 31st of December. Will he do it? Will he not do it? We don't know. If he does not do it, what happens? So, there are limits to how far the judiciary can go. But we have to understand that our constitution requires certain values to be followed, certain constitutional morality to be believed in. I have already adverted to the preamble, and we must have persons in power, persons in authority, constitutional functionaries, executive functionaries, who abide by the principles that our founding fathers laid down and which was accepted by the Constituent Assembly. Today we have a huge pendency of cases. More than 5 crore cases are pending. 50 million or 5 crore cases are pending. Many of them lakhs of cases, I think about 7 or 8 lakh of cases are pending for more than 20 years. Yesterday, the Honorable President spoke about access to justice. What is access to justice? I mean, if there are 5 crore cases pending, when is your case going to be taken up? Is it going to be taken up after 10 years? Is it going to be taken up after 20 years? Does it have any meaning after 20 years? Cases are being decided now, in some cases, after 10, 15 years. That person may not even be alive at the time when the case is decided. So all this, makes justice, which is a part of our preamble, completely meaningless. Public interest litigation was a very good weapon that was given to the people of India by the Supreme Court, where you could file a public interest litigation. Procedures were not necessary. The Supreme Court went to the extent of saying you can send a letter. You can send a letter to the Chief Justice of India saying this is what the problem is. And the Chief Justice of India will probably deal with it if he thinks it is important. I've had to deal with letter petitions. We got a letter from a former Chief Justice of India saying that the conditions in the prisons in India is horrible. Please do something about it. The sitting Chief Justice of India thought it was an important case, sent it to my bench, the Social Justice bench, to look into it. We looked into it. We passed certain orders. The matter is still pending. So you have, these rights that are available to you, to the citizens of India. We have these rights, but the question is that is the judiciary in a position to give meaning to those rights, to give meaning to justice, to give meaning to equality, to give meaning to liberty, where persons are in jail for months together, anticipatory bail is not being given, bail is not being given, you just stay in jail for another maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 months, maybe more than a year. Marginalized sections of society which the Honorable President referred to yesterday, what about them? Do they have access to justice? That is a question that we need to ask ourselves. Lawyers charge very heavy fees. Coming to the Supreme Court is not easy. What happens to marginalized people? It's only persons who have the money who are in a position to come to the courts. Otherwise, the marginalized sections will remain where they are without justice. Human rights have suffered. There have been arbitrary arrests. There have been fake encounters, not one or two fake encounters, many fake encounters in different parts of the country. There is no accountability of the state machinery in issues like this. Somebody is going, they say that, oh, this person is a murderer or he's a rapist or he's this, that, and the other. Fake encounter, and that person is shot. What happens to the person who does that? Nothing. Nothing happens. We've had a situation in Delhi where the police from another state came, picked up a person from Delhi, took him to that state, showed an arrest in that state. They did not say that we picked up the person from Delhi. They said we found him in that state and we arrested him over there for some offense. And when the public interest litigation was filed, the Delhi High Court found that the person had been picked up from Delhi. Records were fabricated by the police. That is the finding of the Delhi High Court. What happened to those policemen? Nothing. Bulldozer justice, which I have already referred to, what happens? You demolish somebody's house, or you demolish hundreds of hutments without following the rule of law. What happens? Nothing. So these are problems, that we are being faced with, and some of them, or many of them actually have been referred to in this report. Where do we go from here? Now, I think it is important for us as citizens to be aware of our rights. We have rights which are given to us by the Constitution of India. We have rights that are given to us by laws. I think we have to be aware of our rights. We have to be aware of how to enforce those rights. How do we enforce those rights? In some cases, we do not have the information. You have the Right to Information Act. Unfortunately, that is also being diluted. Persons are not being appointed to the Information Commission. They have to go to the Supreme Court to say that please appoint somebody to the Information Commission. And reluctantly, people are appointed. So we are not able to get information. That is where, the work being done by civil society, being done by individuals, being done by NGOs, becomes very important, because they are the persons who know what exactly is happening. And that is why I think, this is my opinion, that is perhaps one of the reasons why civil society is being targeted and NGOs are being targeted, because they are the ones who are able to give us information about what is happening, because they are at the ground. So you cut off the right to information, you cut off civil society, NGOs, where do I get the information from? There's no other source. They say that the press has become Godi media, right? So I will not get information from the press. They say that some of these TV channels are in the hands of corporates, so I will not get information. Today, there was an article in the newspapers about what is happening. Unfortunate event in Uttarakhand, about those miners, about those persons in the tunnel. There was no information about that for the first 2-3 days. It is only when it started getting prolonged and people were wondering what's happened that the TV channels began to talk about it. Otherwise, for the first 2-3 days, according to this article, there was very little information. Accountability, RTI, I think, needs to be strengthened. We need to have social audits. We need to have performance audits. Social audit was conducted for Manrega. A lot of gaps are found. Performance audits are absolutely necessary to find out where are we going wrong. What is it that we can do to improve the situation? When we talk about environment impact assessment, what else is it but some form of an audit? Now, if you dilute environment impact assessment, EIA, what kind of information are you likely to get? And then you have a problem like you have in Joshimath. You have a problem like you have in many parts of the country. You have a problem like you have in Uttarakhand. So I think these are areas that we need to look at. The last thing that I would like to say is to consider the accountability of the people in power, whether they are our elected representatives or whether they are officers or whether they are police. The police just can't pick up a person and say, I'm putting you to jail. I will not tell you why I'm sending you to jail. I will tell you later, but you spend 1 week in jail. And then after that, an application is filed for remand and all that, and the person remains in jail for a few months. These are the people who should be accountable. And that accountability, which is what was there in the RTI, that accountability, I think if it is down the line, whether it is our legislators, whether it is our judiciary, whether it is our police, whether it is the officers in the government, unless we bring about that accountability, which I think we should try with information like you have over here, I think that is what is going to bring about the change. So thank you very much and all the best.
Request Jitendra. Okay.
सरकार लोकतंत्र के बारे में जिसकी काफ़ी बातें हुई, लेकिन हमारा संविधान जो है 4 चीज़ों पर, न्याय, स्वतंत्रता, बराबरी और बंधुत्व पर आधारित है। और संविधान निर्माताओं ने उसी को किसी तरह से पाने के लिए ज़रूरत उस पर जोर दिया है। अगर हम इन मूलभूत बातों को पाना चाहते हैं तो हमको इसकी ज़रूर ही ध्यान में रखना पड़ेगा, उसको हम रखेंगे। और विधायिका पर जो रिपोर्ट है, जो विधायिका पर एक रिपोर्ट थी, इसमें 40% जनप्रतिनिधि चाहे सांसद विधायक उनके ऊपर आपराधिक मामले थे। कुछ मामले ऐसे भी रहे होंगे जो निजी दुश्मनी के चलते हुआ होगा, लेकिन बहुत से मामले ऐसे हैं जिसमें 302 का मुकदमा है, रेप के चार्ज हैं जो गंभीर मुकदमे हैं। और जब तक इस तरह के लोग हैं ये विधायिका में हैं, तब तक इस तरह की चीज़ों पर रोक लगे ये काफ़ी मुश्किल सा लगता है। सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने कहा था कि जो विधायिका में जो अपराध हैं, जो जिस तरह की चीज़ें हैं, उस पर जल्दी उस मामलों का निपटारा होना चाहिए, लेकिन उस पर भी बहुत काम नहीं हुआ। अभी भी वो इतना ही धीमी गति से चल रहा है। एक पूर्व प्रधान न्यायाधीश ने कहा था कि कई कानून ऐसे बने जो बिना बहस के बने, बहुत गंभीरता से उस पर बहस नहीं हुई, और चूंकि बहस नहीं हुई इसलिए उसमें कई खामियां रह गई। अब कानून को बदलने के लिए उस पर बहस की ज़रूरत होती है, लेकिन संसद और विधानसभा आजकल हर बात पर एडजॉर्न हो जाता है, हंगामा मचता है, और कुछ विधानसभा तो साल में 20 दिन से भी कम चलते हैं। तो जब 20 दिन भी ना चले तो वहाँ पर किस तरह बहस होगी, और अगर इस तरह से एडजॉर्न होता रहेगा तो कैसे होगा। हमारी जो व्यवस्था है उसमें हम अपने सांसद को नहीं जानते, हम अपने विधायक को नहीं जानते, हम अपने पार्षद को नहीं जानते, और ना हम उनसे संपर्क कर पाते हैं। जस्टिस लोकुर ने यहाँ से 2 जजों के जाने का एक उदाहरण दिया, जिसमें उन्होंने बताया कि 2 जजों को कनाडा जाना था और मई जून का समय था शायद, और सारी चीज़ें बंद थी। तो उन्होंने वहाँ के जो कनाडा के जो लोग थे उन्होंने वहाँ संपर्क किया, फिर उन्होंने अपने सांसद को कहा, उनके सांसद ने यहाँ पर इनके एम्बेसडर को कहा, और उनको वीज़ा मिल गया इन जजों को। तो कनेक्ट जो था विधायक से, अपने प्रतिनिधि से, सांसद से, विधायक से, वो इस तरह से मदद करता है। उन्होंने अपना उदाहरण दिया कि जब वो सुप्रीम कोर्ट में सामाजिक न्याय मंत्रालय बेंच को हेड करते थे, तो कई ऐसे मामले आए जिसमें मतलब कानून अच्छे थे, जैसे मनरेगा का मामला, जैसे राइट टू फूड माने भोजन का अधिकार का मामला, लेकिन उसे लागू कैसे किया जाए, वो इम्प्लीमेंट कैसे हो, उसमें काफ़ी गड़बड़ियाँ थी और अभी भी ये गड़बड़ियाँ हैं। तो जब तक इसको मतलब इम्प्लीमेंट करने की चीज़ों को नहीं ठीक से किया जाएगा, देखा जाएगा, तब तक ये स्थितियाँ बनी रहती हैं। अब पॉलिस नीति निर्माण के बारे में उन्होंने कहा कि कई कानून ऐसे बने जिस पर बहस ही नहीं हो पाई। महीनों से लोकपाल का पद खाली है, सूचना आयुक्त का पद खाली है। काफ़ी भरे मन से कानून को लागू किया जाता है, मन नहीं होता है, लेकिन चूंकि वो कानून बन गया है तो जो कार्यपालिका है उनको लागू करना है, लेकिन वो मन नहीं होता है तो चूंकि वो लागू ही नहीं होता है। उन्होंने उदाहरण दिया कि बुलडोजर से घर ढहा दिए जाते हैं, जबकि किसी भी प्रोटोकॉल का जो कानून में निहित है उसका पालन नहीं किया जाता है। कोई एफआईआर नहीं होता है, कोई सूचना नहीं दी जाती है, बस वो कर दिया जाता है, उसे घर को तोड़ दिया जाता है। सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने कहा कि जिस तरह से बच्चों को, स्टूडेंट्स को सोशल मीडिया के चलते गिरफ्तार कर लिया जाता है, उस मामले में थोड़ा नरमी बरते, लेकिन जब इसे कार्यपालिका को लागू करने की बात होती है तो चूंकि वो सुप्रीम कोर्ट का है कि आप थोड़ा नरमी बरतें हैं, इस पर आप कार्रवाई ठीक से इस तरह से नहीं कर सकते, इतना हार्श, तो उन्हें यूएपीए के तहत इन लोगों को गिरफ्तार कर लिया जाता है। और जस्टिस लोकुर कह रहे थे कि न्यायपालिका की भी एक सीमा होती है, जबकि हर चीज़ जब सिर्फ कानून के तहत ही कोर्ट में ही जाके अगर होगा तो तब फिर वो काफ़ी मुश्किलें हो जाती है। हमारे पूर्वजों ने जब इसे कोर्ट में इसे बेहतर करने की कोशिश की थी, कानून लागू किया गया था, तो यही एक है कि मतलब बेहतर से ढंग से काम हो। अब इस देश में 5 करोड़ से ज़्यादा मामले लंबित हैं। 6 या 7 लाख मामले ऐसे हैं जिसकी 20 वर्षों से सुनवाई ही नहीं हुई है, लंबित है, 20 साल से सुनवाई ही नहीं, लंबित है, मतलब सॉरी 20 साल से वो 6 से 7 लाख मामले ऐसे हैं जो 20 साल से लंबित हैं। कल राष्ट्रपति जी ने लंबित मामलों के बारे में बात की। उन्होंने पीआईएल के बारे में कहा कि उस सुप्रीम कोर्ट के जज ने, मतलब प्रधान न्यायाधीश ने कहा था कि अगर आप मामले को इस तरह से नहीं लाएं तो एक सिर्फ चिट्ठी लिख कर दे दें और हम इसकी सुनवाई करेंगे। एक पूर्व माननीय प्रधान न्यायाधीश ने ऐसी ही एक चिट्ठी लिखी कैदियों के बारे में कि उनकी हालत कितनी ख़राब है, और इस पर अभी तक सुनवाई नहीं हो पाई, जबकि चीफ जस्टिस ने कहा कि काफ़ी महत्वपूर्ण मामला है, इसको हमको ध्यान देना चाहिए, लेकिन अभी तक उस पर कोई कार्रवाई नहीं हो पाई। फिर उन्होंने कहा कि जब इस तरह की स्थिति बनती है तो हाशिए पर जो पड़े लोग हैं उनको न्याय कहाँ से मिलेगा। सुप्रीम कोर्ट आना बहुत ही मुश्किल होता है, इतना महंगा वकील कौन करेगा, वो हाशिए के लोग को पता कैसे चलेगा। इसलिए सुप्रीम कोर्ट तक पहुँचना उन हाशिए के लोगों के लिए असंभव सा होता है। मानवाधिकार का मामला यहाँ खतरे में है। किसी भी की गिरफ्तारी हो जाती है, फेक इनकाउंटर हो जाता है। एक उन्होंने उदाहरण दिया कि एक आदमी को दिल्ली से पकड़ के ले जाया गया अपने राज्य में, फिर उनको दिखाया गया कि उसी राज्य में गिरफ्तार किया गया है जिस राज्य ले जाया गया, उनका इनकाउंटर हो गया और इनकाउंटर किया गया। हाईकोर्ट ने माना कि ये गड़बड़ियाँ हुई है, लेकिन वह पुलिस अधिकारी फ्री है, उसको कुछ नहीं कोर्ट कर पाई। तो उन्होंने सिविल सोसाइटी एनजीओ के काम की सराहना की और उन्होंने कहा कि यही कारण है कि सरकार सिविल सोसाइटी और एनजीओ को टारगेट करती है, क्योंकि वो बातें सामने लाते हैं जो सरकार नहीं चाहती है कि वो बातें सामने आए। प्रेस के बारे में उन्होंने प्रेस को गोदी मीडिया के रूप में कहा, और उन्होंने यह भी कहा कि कुछ मीडिया हाउसेज जो है वो कॉरपोरेट चला रहा है। उन्होंने एक अभी तत्काल जो सूचना 15 दिनों से चल रहा है टनल वाला, उसके बारे में उन्होंने बताया कि 2-3 दिनों तक तो वो सचमुच खबर नहीं थी दिल्ली के, मतलब किसी भी राष्ट्रीय अखबारों में। हम दिल्ली में रहते हैं और क्योंकि वो क्रिकेट का विश्व कप चल रहा था, मैं अपनी तरफ से जोड़ रहा हूँ क्रिकेट का विश्व कप वाला, लेकिन 2-3 दिनों के बाद ये सूचना आनी शुरू हुई, वो भी और सीमित इसमें। तो जस्टिस लोकुर का कहना था कि जो सत्ता में है, जो पावर में है, जो कार्रवाई करता है, उनकी जवाबदेही तय होनी चाहिए। अगर किसी पावरफुल आदमी ने किसी को गिरफ्तार किया है और अगर वह गलत है तो उसको जवाबदेही ठहराया जाना चाहिए, उसको सज़ा होनी चाहिए, तब एक बेहतर स्थिति बनेगी। बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया।